Okay, so this is the first demo in the series of demos I anticipate doing on game Crown of Roses. And what I've done here is I've set the game up. It's a generic setup here for the 3.1 scenario, the Seeds of Descent, which is one of two scenarios that are the full 9 turns. Starts on turn 1 on the turn track and ends on turn 9. There was some discussion on Consum World about what years the turns represent. I think the answer was that each turn represents something like 4 years. And it's not a short game. One of the things I'll mention before we get started here is that this is one of those games that is going to work really well with some groups, and other groups may not find it as enjoyable. The best thing I can suggest with this game is to take it for what it is and not try to make it into something that it's not. One of the things that may frustrate players early on in the game, especially if you're playing tabletop, is trying to figure out all those herald symbols, the shields that you see on the map. The heraldic symbols link to the blocks in the game. So a block will have a certain shield on the front of it, and then you match that up to the different counties. I can't remember what they're called. I'm going to call them counties. Shires, that's what they're called in the game system. It'll correspond with that. For example, Buckingham will correspond with the Buckinghamshire, which is nice when it has the same name. But another lord also has his home territory in the Buckinghamshire, which is just adjacent to London, if you want to follow on the map. I'll use well, I guess the London garrison doesn't move. That's my fault. I'll just use this pawn here to show you what I'm talking about. So you can see there's two different lords that have that as their home estate. And also, if Buckingham would also have Gloucester. I think that's how you're supposed to say that. Kent is also his. Stafford. So you get an idea how confusing this can be to a new player, because the home estates are not contiguous, and something of an alphabet soup. An easy mistake to make would be to confuse the heraldic symbol for Buckingham, which is the yellow shield, with the inverted V, the inverted red V that you see here at Gloucester. But if I go down to Somerset, there's another shield, looks almost exactly the same. The keyword there being almost. It's not the same. It's got a darker border around it. That's a different lord. I believe that's Southwick. Yes, that's Lord Southwick. Another one that's similar, that's easy to mix up, is this guy over here at Northampton. That is Wiltshire. The Lord Wiltshire. So this can be really confusing. Now, to help with this, I'll just show you what Vassal will do. Is if you right-click on a block in Vassal, it'll give you a menu to send to the home estate, and it'll give you the options right there, and it'll actually send it to that particular estate. And through trial and error, you should be able to navigate this. Let me just say, as someone who does not know English, the British Isles geography and these names very well, that after about 2 full game turns of going through this, I was starting to get a pretty good handle on what lords had which areas. So if it's your first game, it might be a little frustrating for the first turn or two, but if you stick with it, it eventually will begin to sink in. Another thing that can help with this is inside the playbook. At the back of the playbook, there is an index of sorts. Section PB 6.3 has something called the nobles, and it'll take you through all the nobles, that what their home estates are, and gives you a little picture of the map and shows you graphically where their home estates are. And you'll find that that's a pretty helpful tool. Unfortunately, there's only one playbook in the game, and of course there's 6 players. So if or excuse me, 4 players. If you have all 4 players at the table, then it's recommended that each 4 of them bring their rulebook and their playbook with them, because you're going to be frequently referring to those. That's assuming, of course, that all 4 players own the game, of course. I think you can download the rulebook from the website. I'm not sure about the playbook. It would be helpful if you could, because the data, the back of that's pretty useful. Another thing that's useful, if you don't know the name of the estate, there is a map index on the very back of the rule book that will help you track down. Some of the cards will make reference to the county of Surrey. Okay, well, where the heck is Surrey? Well, you look at the back of the Crown of Roses rule book, look up Surrey, and it says 7/22. So you can follow the numbers around the map to find 7/22, and you locate it right around London, right where I moved that black pawn. So that's something that's also helpful for the new player. Seems like there's something else we need to talk about before we get started here. I like it to look at this game. It's almost like a grandfather clock. If you look at the workmanship of a grandfather clock, it looks really great on the outside, but you know on the inside it consists of an awful lot of moving parts that are all moving together in this perfect symphony. That's what this game tries to do. Now, whether or not it does it, I think is going to depend largely on the group that you play with. But I think that the potential for it to do that is there. This is a game with a lot of moving parts. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm just going to give you the big picture overview, and then we'll start to look at the individual parts. But I think it's more helpful if you see the big picture before you look at all the moving parts. The rule book is pretty substantial. It is 44 pages, including the back page and the glossary, obviously. But what will get you is the sequence of play is not actually even addressed until page 18 of the rule book. And, there's some games that, they're only 18 pages of rules. So you don't even get to the sequence of play until section 18, and there's a lot of stuff that comes before that looks at all the individual parts. I think the rule book is laid out pretty good, but there are a few things that are not explained very well, and the Q&A should definitely be downloaded. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that outline sequence of play, because I think that if you get a broad picture of how the game is supposed to flow, then when we look at all the individual parts, then you'll get a better appreciation of what things do and why they're that way. All right, so the game here is set up for a 4-player game. Oh, I know, that's the other thing I was going to mention. This is just my personal take after running through it a couple times. I kind of poked around with it as a 2-player game to see how the 2-player game would work. And I could be wrong on this because I haven't found someone to actually play with, but my gut impression is that this won't work as well as a 2-player game as perhaps the designer would have wanted it to. My fear is that one player starts to run away with a lead, and basically the rest of the game, the other player is trying to play catch-up and never quite does catch up. So that's my gut impression of the 2-player game. As a 3 or 4-player game, I think that's where it's going to shine, because the building of a coalition can help bring down a player that's starting to run away with power in the game. So if dice really go in somebody's favor, some of the other players can get together, form a coalition of sorts. If there's one game, I've never played the old Avalon Hill Kingmaker. I've heard that it tries to be a more modern version of that. So I don't know if it accomplishes that because I've never played the original Kingmaker. But if there's one game I have played that I say that this game kind of feels like, it's Republic of Rome. It reminds me of that game in a lot of ways, although this is more of a war game than Republic of Rome. So if you've played that, that's more of a diplomacy government simulation than anything else. The military end of that's pretty abstract. This one here is much more hands-on, much more tactical than that game. All right, so with that said, let me just give you a tour around the map. At the top of the map, you have a roll of Parliament, which is just a summary of the different nobles, and some of those nobles are heirs in the game, and just gives you an idea of who has what particular nobles have a particular office. Some of them are marked with an heir marker or a senior heir marker. What you can do in the game, one of the things you'll do is try to steal blocks from other players by placing influence on them. The number on the roll of Parliament, the big black number, is the amount of influence that you must lay down. You have to at least put that level of influence and have more than the other player in order to seize that block, whether it's uncontrolled or controlled by another player. Some blocks have a predilection toward a particular faction, and so they'll have a number of roses in the color of that faction laid across them. For example, Exeter, who is the Lord Admiral, he has 3 red roses across his symbol there, showing that he is has basically a 3 influence point advantage over any other player for Lancaster. So if Lancaster were to stick a level 1 influence token on Exeter, that would basically equate to 4. It's 3 plus 1 there. So he's already got a 3 influence leg up on all the other players. Well, that's what's going on with the little symbols on there. You get the picture of their heraldic shield, and then the 2 numbers that you're going to find on the block are also on there, as well as their combat rating. The combat rating is shown by dice symbols, and let me just give you a quick tour of the blocks. I'll do that by bringing an inactive block onto the map to show you. We'll bring Arundel onto the map, and I will zoom in here on Vassal so the video folks can see this better. Bear with me here. All right, there we go. All right, so Arundel is a what's called a noble. There's several different kinds of blocks in games. There's nobles, there's heirs, and those 2 are very similar to one another, but there's a very crucial difference between them. There's also personages. They might be called leading characters. I can't remember the exact game terminology. We won't get into them very much today. Please don't move any pieces around the board. My map just... Actually, you know what? Hold on a second here. Let me... I think I have the Snap 2 turned on my system, so let me turn that off. I was troubleshooting somebody. Let's see here. Preferences. Center on opponent's moves. There we go. Okay. Yeah, please don't move anything around. This is actually set up how I wanted it here. All right, now it's set up so it won't the map won't snap if somebody disobeys and starts moving stuff. Okay, Arundel has basically 3 steps to him. He is a noble. He's not an heir. I'll show you an heir in just a moment to show you the difference, and I'll also show you a leading character, a personage, to show you the difference between those. There's also what they call them, offices. We'll show you those in just a moment. And there's mercenaries. So Arundel is basically this. You're going to find his characteristics on most of the different blocks in the game. His full strength side has 3 steps. That's the 2 blue dice at the top of his block and the 1 green die. You'll notice that the dice have the numeric symbol. The blues have 5s. The greens have 6s. And some of them will have a red die that has a 4. That's the lowest number that you need to roll in order to score a hit on that particular die. So when Arundel is at full strength, that means he's got 3 steps. He throws 2 blue and 1 green die, and you'll hit on 5s on the blue die, 5s or 6s on the blue die, and he'll hit on 6s alone on the green die. So that's how the combat system works. As he takes step losses, obviously he rotates around. Now, if he's taken 1 hit in combat, now he throws a blue and a green. And when he's on his last step, which is retainer strength, then they don't call them cadres in this game. If you played other block games, 1 step usually means cadre. In this game, it's called retainer strength. Then he only throws 1 green die. If he takes a further hit, he is potentially killed. You actually have to roll on a table to find out what happens to him. He may be just basically put in the penalty box temporarily, as it were, or he could be out of the game for a turn, or he could be just put onto the inactive list. So that's some of the different things that can happen to him. All right, back up to full strength. The number on the lower left-hand side of his block, there's a 2 that's in a circle. That's his command rating. That's the number of other blocks other than himself that he can command in movement and in battle. So Arundel can actually take 2 other blocks along with him into a battle situation, lead them in battle, and march across the map with them. The number in the white square is also a 2 on Arundel, and that is his noble rank. And I want to say that You want to go with the higher number, whatever is the higher number. Let me look at, yeah, Buckingham's a 3, yeah. So you want to go with the higher number. Whenever there's you have to make a test to find out who's the ranking noble in a given situation. You look at that particular thing there. I believe that is also the number of votes that he will have. That's actually something that's used more commonly when it comes time to elect the king. You'll look at the number that's in the square. That's how many votes that he gets. In the vassal module, it'll actually tabulate that for you. If you drop any of your blocks into your parliament window, it will count up the votes on those blocks. That vote counter will not take into consideration any other factors, but it will do that. So we'll go ahead and put this guy back in the inactive. Okay, so that's what a regular block is going to look like. Let me show you a noble. Probably the easiest one to show you is going to be over here with York. Down at the bottom lower right hand corner of the map, I have York's blocks all kind of stacked up here. I'll just show you York himself. York, you can see he's a 4-step unit. Now notice that when he's on his 4-step side, he still only throws 3 dice, but one of them is a red die, which hits on 4, 5s, and 6s, and 2 of them are blue dice. As he takes hits, he loses his red die and gets more blue, and on he goes. But he's a 4-step unit. And you'll see the little crown symbol in the upper right-hand corner of him. You'll also notice if you look at the roll of Parliament, you will not see a space for him. That's because he is an heir. Heirs cannot be influenced. That means you can't steal them under normal circumstances. There's one notable exception to that. That's, I want to say, Clarence. And so he does have a space on the roll of Parliament. But in every other case, an heir cannot be swayed to another side. But you can only have 2 heirs in play at any one time. You have a senior heir and a junior heir. At the start of the game, I think the only player with both a senior and a junior heir is the Warwick faction. All the other factions just have a senior heir right now. In order to get a junior heir, they're going to have to play one of their cards. So that's what an heir block does. It's very similar to a noble. Heirs basically are nobles, but not all nobles are heirs. That's the easiest way to explain it. Some of the blocks that you see on the roll of Parliament have that crown symbol, but they're on the roll of Parliament. What that means is that they are a noble that can eventually become an heir. To make them an heir, you have to play a card from your hand to upgrade them to that heir status, which basically removes them from the ability to place influence on them. That seals them into your faction, as it were. Okay, to talk about offices really quick. Offices, the York block, it has the office the Lieutenant of Ireland and the Pale. And so an office block is very much like a noble. It has a vote thing there. On the lower right-hand corner, that's how many votes he gets by having the Lieutenant of Ireland and the Pale. And he's a 3-step block, but he only hits on 6s and only throws a maximum of 2 dice. So it's not a really strong block. But what an offices will do, we'll explain a little bit later, but that's what an office block will look like. Another type of block you're going to run into are personages and there's only 2 of them in the game, and they're both associated with the Lancaster faction. And that is Henry VI, who begins the game as king, and Queen Margaret, who is a little bit better of a warrior, as it were, than King Henry VI. Once these guys are killed, they're removed from the game. You can't place influence on them. Plus, they can't march on their own. They have a command rating of 0, which means they got to tag along with somebody else. So that's what the leading characters do. There's some other things going on with them that we won't get into right now. Last kind of block that we'll run into are mercenaries. They enter play via card play, and you'll find it in the inactive blocks area, or not. Yeah, there they are. Yeah, the Burgundians, the French, the Scots, and the Welsh. I'll put the Burgundians here on the map so you can see over by the number 10 on the circular track, over by Lancaster's play mat. You'll see the Burgundians. It's a 3-step block. Hits on 4s and 5s and 6s with its full strength side, and once it takes a hit, still gets its red die. When it's on retainer strength, it's still a blue die. So it's a pretty powerful block. It has no command value. It has no votes. That means it's got to tag along with somebody. You have to attach this to another block in order to march with it. And so that's how mercenaries work. Usually only in play for a given turn. At the end of the turn, they're removed from play. So those are mercenaries. All right, so that's the blocks in the game. Other pieces in the game we'll talk about as we get to them. You have influence tokens, support tokens. You have cards. You have cards that are associated with your house. If many of you can't open up a hand window, but if I open up Buckingham's hand window, you'll see here, I'll drag some of his cards out. You'll see he's got some cards that are associated with his faction. You'll see the yellow rose on the upper left-hand corner of his card. And so that's how you know that it's a Buckingham card. Buckingham begins the game with 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards in his hand, one of them in play, which is the heir Buckingham. That's on his senior heir spot of his playmat. And he also happens to have the office of Chancellor. There are Parliament cards in the game. They form something of a Parliament deck. Right now there's one card in the Parliament deck because it's the unused office. At present there's no Lord Treasurer, but all the other offices have been distributed. And this is where the game kind of feels to me like Republic of Rome, where in Republic of Rome you have a consul, you have proconsuls, you have all these different little offices, governors that can be doled out. Well, that's kind of something that happens in here, and each office conveys special advantage to the player. And you retain that office for the duration of the turn. At the end of the turn, there's new offices will be voted on and distributed amongst the players. And this is where this game will work really well with the right groups, because there's going to be a lot of diplomacy, wheeling and dealing, and no deals are binding in this particular game. So there's lots of room for backstabbing and whatnot. Around the map there is a numbered track. That's the influence track. That basically marks how many influence tokens you collect at a certain stage of the game's sequence of play. You also have a sequence of play track, speaking of that, right on the left-hand side of the map there. You have a sequence of play track that'll guide you through the turn. We'll get to that in just a moment. That's what we're going to spend most of the night on, that. There's a turns as king track. Now, Lancaster begins the game as king. Right now, Henry VI is the king. However, he does not, if Henry VI is ever king, he does not get the king block. The office block for king is a very powerful block, but he never gets it. So that's just unfortunate. But he does get the Parliament card and the power associated with that. But he does not get the king block, nor is the Lancaster pawn placed on the number 1 spot of the turns as king track. Now, one of the victory conditions in the game is to be elected king a certain number of times based on the scenario. And I want to say scenario 3.1 is your goal is to be elected king a total of 5 times. So let me just double check that. I think that is the case. But I forgot to check that before I started. Yep. There's 3 different kinds of victories that you can get in the game. There's a military, a political, and an economic victory. The military victory, I don't know if this is even possible. I suppose it's possible, but highly unlikely. Just my look at the game. I could be completely wrong on that, but the idea is to eliminate all enemy heirs from play. I think in a 2-player game, that's definitely possible. In a 4-player game, that's tricky. Because if all the other players have 2 heirs in play to kill off, first of all, killing the block does not necessarily kill that heir from play. So killing an heir is actually more difficult than just killing the block. And to do that for all the other players that's pretty impressive and very difficult. It's a threat that you do have to take seriously, and you never want to have your heirs killed because the block is gone forever. Political victory is to be voted king 5 times or more in this particular scenario. Again, that is much more doable, in my opinion. And in a 2-player game, I think that's definitely much more doable. Economic victory is to have the most economic VPs at the end of the game, which in this case is 9 turns. That, I think, is going to be the most common form of victory in the game, unless one of the players, plays the role of kingmaker and lets another player win to get elected king. to get elected king, I think you're going to need more help from other players and do a lot of wheeling and dealing. So those are the 3 different kinds of victory, and so there's a track to track which factions have been elected king how many times. All right, the map itself, we'll talk about that when we get into marching and moving, but there's different borders around the land, different heraldic shields. There's numbers inside boxes, which also basically give you the economic value of that particular region. It's also how many influence tokens you can pick up for that region. If you want to know why a pawn is in a certain place on the influence track that goes around the border of the map, it's because on the previous turn they occupied a number of shires that had a numeric value that brought them to that level of influence. All right, last but not least, over in the left-hand corner, you have a turn track and an impulse track. The impulse track, final impulse will be associated with the number of cards. The least number of cards that a given player has drawn is where that influence counter will be placed. So if a player only draws 5 cards, then that would be placed in the 5. In other words, if the player with the fewest cards, let me put it that way, if the player with the fewest cards has 5 cards in his hand, not counting his house cards, I'm talking about the regular cards, then that would be put there. Every impulse, you do have to play a card during the action phase. Oh yeah, one more thing. Down the bottom, popular support. This is harder to explain. There's a lot of different things in the game that will give you popular support. As your pawn moves up on this, different things will happen to you, all of them good. You can get an extra card draw. You get extra votes. You get extra influence tokens and whatnot. So that's what popular support will do. At the beginning of the game, Lancaster has the fewest amount of popular support at 2, followed by Buckingham at 3, York at 4, and Warwick at 5. So those are the, that's basically a look, or just a brief look around the map. Okay, so we toured around the map. We've taken just a briefest look at the blocks and the playing surface we're going to be using. Each player also has a play mat. Now in the Vassal, I've arbitrarily made little slots so you can put your Parliament card down and your House allies. Queen Margaret, by the way, for Lancaster is not a house ally, but it's a card that's in play that can be used in a certain way, and it's just a convenient spot to stick her. Might actually be better to put her over here. She's got a function that you can use once per turn, and then once it's been used, you flip the card over to show that you've used that function for that turn. But the limitations in Vassal, that's just an arbitrary thing on my part for playability. You could actually have more than 3 house allies in play. At this stage here, all the players would draw a number of cards, and I'll start with Buckingham just to give you a picture. Now you can't open Buckingham's hand, but I'll look at the number of cards that they get. Essentially, you're going to draw a number of cards equal to 5, and there's a little play aid right next to the turns as king spot on your screen. It says a player draws an extra card for each of the following. You're going to draw a base number of 5 cards plus 1 for each of these cases here in the game. I think we're actually supposed to start with the wintering phase, but I'll just walk you through the sequence of play here to show you how this would actually work. So you draw 5 cards, plus if you control Calais, you'd get 1 there. If you control London, 1 there. If you have the Office of King, you get an extra card. If you control the Warwick block, that's only in 2- and 3-player games. You would get an extra card. In a 4-player game, that does not apply. And if you look at the popular support track down at the bottom, there's additional cards that you can get for having a number of popular support. Right now, York and Warwick qualify for an extra card draw during the card draw phase. After you would draw cards, you then go to the operations phase, and during that, each player will play a card and resolve that. Cards will have these characteristics. Let me drag one here onto the map so you can see what I'm talking about. I'll flip him over. This is a card, just a typical card you're going to find in the deck. You'll see that it has an op value, so if you've played card-driven games before, that's common. Let's go around the card here. Upper left-hand corner, you have the number. That's its op value. The type of card that you're dealing with is color-coded along the center line near the top. Allies have a green stripe and it says ally in it to show you. The card's number is up at the top. I don't think that plays any role in the game. The upper right-hand corner also has the name of a shire with like a skull. What that's for is there's certain cards that will say draw a card and consult the upper right-hand corner and place plague in that particular shire. So that's what that random location thing is for. And then you also have an event. In this case, this is an ally card for the Archbishop Bishop of Canterbury, and it has its particular function there. It tells you how to play this card. If you play it for the event, you stick it into play, and that's pretty much all you would do with this for the event. Then you may discard it while in play to do any one of those 3 bullet points. So that's what house allies will do for you. Basically, most of them are minor lords that didn't qualify for a block in the game, but still have enough of an effect in the game. Some of them give you like an extra die in a battle. Some of them give you extra votes or influence. Archbishop of Canterbury can give you an extra card draw to your hand by discarding him. So, maybe you put him in play now, but later on you discard him because you need an extra card. That's what you could do with him. And once you lose him, you use him, he's discarded, and maybe later in the game you'll get him, but maybe another faction will draw him. So those are how cards are played. Now the card play in here is going to be typical. It's kind of going to be unusual for block games. If you're used to playing block games, the mechanic is not unusual. Basically, each player takes a card from their hand, lays it face down on the table, and then all the players will reveal the card simultaneously. And then you consult the op value, and going in descending order from highest op to lowest op value, those players take their impulse during the action phase. So let's say one player plays Archbishop at Canterbury, they would probably go first. However, let's say another player drew this one, which is or decided they were going to play this for the op value. This is another 3-op card. Whenever you have ties in the game, there's a pretty elaborate tiebreaker, but it's almost always going to be decided in this way. Whoever is the king gets to choose. So if you have the office of king, that is an enormous amount of power because you break all the ties. You have the final say in those things. If there's no king, then there's other mechanics that we'll talk about on another occasion. But usually there's going to be a king, a player that is elected to king, and that player would get to decide. So you go down the order, and every player takes their impulse, and once that's done, then you move the pawn on the influence or the impulse track to the next spot. If you get to that last turn spot, then that would conclude the operations phase. So then you go to the influence phase. The influence phase, you look at all the areas where you've got blocks on the map, and you're going to collect influence for them. Basically, the numeric value of that particular county or shire is how many influence points you get, and so you're going to adjust your pawn on that influence track. You don't add those numbers to your existing pawn's spot. Rather, you adjust your pawn to match whatever influence you happen to have at that instant. After that, we go to the king phase, and in the king phase, you're actually going to remove all your blocks from the map, so the map will actually be emptied of blocks. All the lords have to attend Parliament, and once that's done, then you tabulate your votes. You vote for the king. You vote for a player to be king, really. You don't vote for a particular lord to be king. You vote for a player to be king, and all the players' votes go to whatever player they're going to support. To assist in this, there are these support tokens. I'll show you Buckingham's here. He's got these 4 support tokens. And in Vassal, it's probably going to be more convenient to place these into your hand window than on your player mat. What would happen is each player will take one of these tokens, put it in the palm of their hand. They will then reveal them all simultaneously. Now, we've talked about how cards are played simultaneously, and in a tabletop situation that's very easily done. In Vassal, it's a little bit more elaborate. So here's how you do this in Vassal. It's actually pretty simple. what I would do is I would open up Buckingham's hand window, and I'll put these 4 tokens in there. All right, and then I decide, did I get all 4 of them in there? Make sure I did. Yeah, I did. Okay, and then I decide which player Buckingham's going to throw his support to. So what I'll do is I'll secretly select one of those, and then in a hand window, in the lower right-hand corner of the hand window, there is an empty box, and it says in that box, place card or face down or piece, place card or piece to declare in this box. So whatever piece I'm going to declare, picture that little box as the palm of your hand. So I'm going to stick a token in there, and then I'm going to do the same thing for York, just to show you how this works. So let's go down to York, and I'll take all of their support tokens, put it into York's hand. All right, and then I'll select one. There we go. Okay, so I put one in that little box of both the Buckingham and the York hand windows. Now, once that's done, once every player has done what they're going to do, oh shoot, just for grins, let's go ahead and do it for Warwick. So I'll put those in Warwick's hand. All right, and I'll do it again for Lancaster. And obviously in a 4-player situation, this would work a lot faster because everyone's doing this at the same time. And let's see, Lancaster hand. Okay, so I've selected one for each of the 4 players. Now, on the toolbar, there is a button that says Reveal Declarations. When I click that, it actually reveals all the declarations in a declarations window. You access that by clicking on the declarations window toolbar button, and it opens up the window, and then you'll see all the pieces are revealed. Now, don't make the mistake of putting your hidden pieces into the declarations window, because it automatically reveals any hidden piece that's stuck here. So it doesn't matter if your card was face down or hidden, or your piece was hidden when it was in your hand. Anything you stick in this window is instantly revealed. And so this is a way that this is all done simultaneously. And so we have this very interesting situation. I just did this totally random, but it looks like York supported himself, and Lancaster supported himself. Buckingham supported Warwick, and Warwick supported Buckingham. So this is how this would be worked out. And then you would look at, there's little markers that you can use to track how many votes a given faction has. And so you tabulate the votes, and then the king is selected. Once the king is selected, all the Parliament cards are returned to the Parliament deck. As you get rid of your Parliament card, you lose whatever level of support that card says it has. For example, once Lancaster gives up the Lord Admiral of England card, he will lose 1 support. And when he gives up Lord Warden of the North Marches, he will lose 1 support. Now, if he gets that office, he gets that support back. But all those get shuffled up. You shuffle them all together, you draw them out randomly, and as each one is drawn, it's decided upon. And so how it's decided upon is you use the influence tokens that are on your playmat. There's a pool of unclaimed influence. That is influence tokens that you may not use. Okay, you have to use influence tokens that are in your, I think it's called your influence point stock. There it is, right there. So you have to use those influence tokens in there. And so you secretly select these. And again, for this stage of things, it might be more helpful to put all of those tokens into your hand window. You can flip them, face down on the map, obviously, and mix them up that way. But it might be easier to put them in your hand window. And you select one of those, and then you use those support tokens. So you'll have actually 2 counters in your hand. You'll have one for the influence, the amount of influence you're willing to spend, and what faction you're going to support to cast your vote for that particular office. So if Lancaster puts a 2 influence token in his hand and places a Warwick, support Warwick token in his hand, and when he reveals it, that means he's spending 2 of his influence for Warwick to get that particular office. So that's how the offices are distributed. Obviously, the more influence you have, the more power you have in deciding this. And again, if there is a tie, in other words, let's say Warwick gets 2 votes, and Buckingham gets 2 votes, and York ends up with 2 votes, well, the king actually decides which particular faction would break that tie. So again, the king is a very powerful, has a very, very powerful ability in the game. So once that's done, all the offices got to get distributed out there, and there's little minuscule rules about what kinds of lords can hold certain offices. Some lords can't. Some blocks can't have certain offices, and once that's all taken care of, you collect the block for that particular office, the card for that office, and then we move to the next phase, which is victory check phase. You find out, make sure the game hasn't ended. If the king's been elected the right number of times, the game would terminate at this point. In fact, it would actually not be even necessary to distribute the offices at that stage. You know what? I think I screwed that up. Actually, the offices are done after victory check phase. So you elect a king, you check to see if he wins, then you do the offices. Okay. Now, wintering phase. This is actually where the scenario is supposed to pick up. And that is where you take all of your blocks that are on your playmat in the what's called the unclaimed nobles and waiting heirs spot. And you take all those blocks and one by one you place them on the map. They have to be placed in the map into a county or shire that matches their heraldic symbol. So, for example, what happened to York? Let me zoom out here. Let's see. Oh, there he is. Okay. Obviously, he's on the York map. Okay. Let me show you with York here. York has been given the office of Lieutenant of Ireland in the Pale. You'll see that his heraldic symbol is the white rose. That's the easiest one to find on the map because it stands apart from all the shields. So the white rose, the red rose, those are really easy to find on the map. Any of those counties his block could be placed in. But let's say he didn't want to be placed in any of those. He could actually be placed in the Ireland Shire because he has the Lieutenant of Ireland office. So you can go into any shire that matches your shield, or if you have an office associated with that particular block, you can go in there. Another example would be Norfolk, which is the Lord Marshal. I think he's Lord Marshal. Make sure those didn't get mixed up. Yeah, he's a Lord Marshal. So he could go into any of his counties. His home estates are Lincoln, Suffolk, Glamorgan, Surrey, and Sussex. I know it's just alphabet soup, but those are his home estates. Or the Lord Marshal. He could go into the Lord Marshal's spots of Chester, Norfolk, or Berkshire. So if you hold an office, that expands the number of spaces that you can go in. But during the wintering phase, you start with the player that got the most number of votes, I want to say, and then you go in descending order through the number of votes from the previous phase. Now at the start of the game, this is done arbitrarily according to scenario rules, which gives you the order. Trying to find it here. It's in 3.1. Stand by. No, it's in here somewhere. Oh, come on. Well, I'm going to have to look it up on another occasion. I want to say the order is Lancaster, York, Buckingham, Warwick. I believe that is the order, but I'm not positive of that. I can't find it in here now. It's buried in here somewhere. They then perform a wintering phase as if a parliament had just ended. The order is Lancaster, York, Warwick, Buckingham. I almost had it right. It's in 3.1.6, very top there, block setup, middle of the paragraph. So that's how this would be done. We would go ahead and go through that order, but here's how it will work. The lords without offices get placed first. So the office holders are going to be placed second. Now, when you place the offices, you go in the order of the office, descending order of rank. So Lieutenant of Ireland in the Pale has a ranking of 7. He would obviously be placed before the Lord Earl Marshal of England, which has a ranking of 4. There's no block for the king, so that one would actually be skipped. So that's the sequence there, and it's a game within a game. You can place these blocks one at a time, and we're going to do this in just a moment. That's how we'll wrap up the demo tonight. But once that's done, then you would do what's called a cleanup phase, and there's one little thing I forgot to do here for the setup, so let me do that real quick. There's a couple devastated regions here that I forgot to mark. Calais was just raided, part of the started place, so plundered marker in that shire. So let me place with depleted. Whoops. Depleted. Here we go. By the way, there's a couple bugs in the module that I discovered. I don't know how these. I mean, this module was released months ago, but had a couple of bugs I found that haven't been reported yet. So I will probably be doing an update here pretty soon. Definitely before the next demo, because I did find a few mistakes. Okay, so a depleted marker there, and I think we're ready to roll with this wintering phase thing. So here's how this is going to work. We go in the order that was prescribed in the scenario. We'll start with Lancaster. So let's go up there, and I'm going to put the office holders just kind of off to the side, which are, let's see, Northumberland has the Warden of the North Marshes, and there's a Lord Admiral, Exeter. Okay, so I'm going to put them aside, and then all the other ones, I'm just kind of spread them out here so we can see what they've got. Yeah, Pembroke, Clifford, Beaumont, Somerset, and the actual Lancaster block himself is actually set aside. He cannot, and that block does not enter play until his Lord card, his Noble card, has been played from the hand. And this is what it would look like. This Edward, Prince of Wales card, it cannot be played until turn 3 or later. So this basically is kept aside in the Lancaster hand. Once that's played, then this block would immediately enter play. Okay, as for Henry and Margaret, they can enter along with any heir that's placed or any noble that's placed. Or you can wait until everybody's placed and then tuck him with some previously placed noble. So we'll go ahead and start by putting, and this is where the game can be kind of confusing, and I don't, if you're playing tabletop, this is what I think might work best. Having the blocks facing the players, assuming you've got a square table and you're all sitting around the table and the blocks facing you, can be terribly confusing. It's kind of disorienting, to me anyways. It might not be for you. What I think might work better would be to have them all facing a unified direction. And what I've done is I've pillaged these little cubes from my copy of Dominant Species, and I've used those to mark what particular block is controlled by a particular lord, particular player. So for all of the blocks that are placed by Lancaster, I would put like a little red cube on top of it. So I lay the thing face down, I put a red cube on them. That's how I mark that Lancaster has it. And then I'll take another red cube and I'll put it in the Roll of Parliament to show that Lancaster has that particular block. Do whatever works best with your particular group. In Vassal, if you're signed in as a certain player, it'll only let you flip the piece over a certain way so that the back side shows the colored rows of that particular player. So for Clifford here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark him as belonging to Lancaster, face down, and now he's hidden to all of you. Now, but to me, the owner, and I'm signed in as referee, I see him, and I can still see the ratings that go around his corner, and I just see a little red rose up in the upper left-hand corner. So with that done, I'm going to go ahead and unhide him. So let me reveal him again. By the way, if you get any error message in the module after you've hidden a block, it's because of some of the automation I've done in the game, and those are some of the bugs I'm trying to unkink from this. So Clifford, how do we where do we place him? Right-clicking on him, you'll see that he can be sent to a home estate in Lincoln or Westmoreland. Let's just arbitrarily put him in Lincoln. So he's in Lincoln County, home of what will shortly become the Lincoln County Wars. Which is funny as a New Mexican. Anyways, he's in that county. Now, notice there's lots of different shields of players that could go in there. This is something that is not explained well in the rules at all. It's implicit in the rules, but it's not explicit. And that is, if a player places a block in the wintering phase in a particular shire, another player is not excluded from placing their block there. However, if they place their block there, there will be a battle as a result of that. But the battle's not going to occur until the combat phase of the operations segment. So one player is going to be marked as an attacker, and who is the attacker when you're placing stuff in the winter phase? The rules don't really make that clear. Ultimately, it comes down to this. The king decides who the attacker is if two enemy blocks are placed in the same county during the wintering phase. Blocks will pin one another. So if you and another player each place a block in the same county or shire, excuse me, then they're going to mutually pin one another, and you won't be able to take them out of that during the operations phase. And in the next combat segment that comes up, a battle will be a result of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next one. So the order was Lancaster, then York. So let's select one of York's lords, and we'll just take the top guy on the stack, Suffolk. This is where I think the game can really slow down, because you really want to think. Ultimately, if you're really playing the game, you really want to think about this. If it's your first game, just put him somewhere to move the game along. Once you figure the game out a little bit better, then maybe you can make decisions a little bit more carefully, but I recommend that you don't agonize too much over this, or the game can just slow way down. So for this guy, I'm going to go ahead and put him in the county of Suffolk. So, okay, and then we go to Warwick, and put his office aside. We'll just take Scrope off the top. He's an easy one. He's only got one home estate, Nottingham. All right, and then Buckingham, take Stafford, and we'll put him in, how about we'll put him in Gloucester. So this is how it works, and you'll see that they're placed on the map, and for our purposes tonight, we're going to get lost here because I can't really mark the blocks as belonging to a certain player without causing issues for you guys, because then you can't see the ratings on them. But you get the idea of how this will work. And how you do this in a 4-player environment, tabletop, that's going to depend on your guys' preferences. I've tried several different ways. Another thing that can be useful if you don't have little colored cubes, some game stores will provide these semi-opaque little plastic discs that you use for playing bingo. And if you find a great big bag of these things, they usually come in a ton of different colors, which means eventually you're going to find a color that's going to work for a particular faction. And so you just take some of these and you can use those to mark on the roll of Parliament. Those almost work better than cubes because you can see through them and you can still read the text underneath. But it tints the color so you can see which factions control which particular blocks. Again, that's going to be up to you. This game, I think, almost would work better as a counter game than block game, because then you could have had 4 different counters for each different noble, and then, as you get control of it, then you get your colored piece and put it on the board. I suppose if you really wanted to get elaborate, you could get, extra blocks, extra labels, and with a little bit of painting, you could make, your own elaborate setup to show, which player controls what blocks. But for me, I found that 4 players around the table, the blocks facing 4 different directions, it got a little confusing. All it took was one person to accidentally bump stuff over, run. Say you got long sleeves on or something, you bump a few blocks around. Okay, well, who controlled what block? It'll drive you crazy. So you're going to have to be careful about that sort of thing with the game. Now, why is it important you might be mindful of where you put your blocks in this phase? Well, it's important because, again, that numeric value there that you see on the map, that's how much influence you'll get during the upcoming influence phase. Also, you'll see that those little colored boxes are they're color coded. Some of them are black with white lettering. Those are counties that are not loyal to a particular faction in the game. But the ones that are blue with white lettering, those are factions that are those particular shires are loyal to the Warwick faction. The ones that are white boxes with black text, those are loyal to York. The yellow with black text is loyal to Buckingham, and the red with the white text is loyal to the Lancaster faction. During the influence phase, if you have your block on someone else's loyal county, for example, Scrope here, I think he was controlled by Warwick, so let's just mark him as that. Let's say that he ends in the turn and he's in the West Riding area. Okay, if that's the case, then during the influence phase, he's actually going to pick up a victory point, because if you actually control a county that is loyal to another player, it's got to be another player. So those black counties are useless for this. That's how you get victory points in the game. So, and it's not, the numeric value is ignored. It's just the color. If I have my blue block in a red box area or a white box or a yellow box area, then I get 1 victory point for having that area. So that's how you get VPs. And again, my personal opinion is that VPs are a much bigger deal than what you would originally think. I think the game is probably going to go to full 9 turns, and the VPs are going to be what decides it. So there's going to be a lot of fighting over that, I think. So that's one of the things that's going on with those numbers. If you are, let's take this blue block I've got here. Let's move him to Worcester. I think that's how you say that, which is over by Hereford and in between Hereford and Warwick on the map. Okay, let's say he's in here during the influence phase. During the influence phase, if you have your block in an area that's loyal to your faction, you get 1 extra influence. So by having him in Worcester, he gets actually 2 influence for that area. 1 for the number in the box and then an extra 1. If he's in the Warwick area, then he would get 3. He would get 2 for the number in the box and then 1 extra. Also, during the influence phase, you would get 1 extra influence for each area that's loyal to you that contains no block whatsoever. So if nobody was in Hereford or Worcester, you'd still get 1 influence for those areas. So that's kind of a cool thing that's going on with those numbers. Last thing about those numbers, in each shire, there's that number is also tied to the stacking rating. Each area at the end of an impulse during the operations phase, you have to check the stacking, and so stacking is equal to that number in the box plus 1. So Worcester at the end of the turn would have a stacking value of 2. If you have more than 2 blocks in there, then each of them have to dice on a table, an attrition table, and there's a chance that they could take a step loss as a result. So that's the third and really important thing about those numbers. Final thing tonight, the garrison block in London. Basically, that is owned by nobody until somebody is in London, and then it's owned by that player. It can never move. It's just that if you ever attack a player in London, the garrison is going to fight for them. And so it's basically a free block. London is not associated with any faction. It's a black box area, but it has an influence of 4, and whoever has it gets an extra card during the card draw phase. Now you'll see that there's no heraldic shield there. If you use the another bug in the module. I don't have a hide blocks marker. London doesn't have a heraldic shield. It actually just has a crown symbol. You'll notice that the shires of Oxford and Berkshire have like a crown in addition to a heraldic shield. The crown means that's where whoever is the king, that particular heir block or noble block can be placed in that particular region during the wintering phase. London is also included there, so you could put, if you have the king, you could put that king into London. Now with I'm not 100% sure of what I'm about to say. I'm 90% sure of this. But I believe that Henry VI, because he does not have the king block, cannot, during the wintering phase, be placed directly into London. So that's going to leave London kind of open. All right, so there is a lot of things going on with the game. You need influence so that you can get offices, and so you can get other people's nobles, and you get as many nobles associated with your faction as possible. And you do that so you can get votes, and you need votes so you can get the office of king, and you want the office of king so you can get more influence and be able to guide the process of the game more powerfully. So there's a lot of things going on here. You also want to get popular support. Anything that gives you popular support gives you more influence, gives you more votes, gives you more cards. All of that's good. You also want to control counties controlled by that are loyal to other players, because that gives you VPs. All of these little things work together. At least that's the intent. And I think with the right group, this game is going to be a lot of fun to play. So like I said, this was just kind of an intro demo tonight. Next one, I want to try to do one before I go to GMT weekend, but I'm not 100% sure that's going to be possible. I've got to get some playtest stuff together for Craig's game, Triumph and Tragedy, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to have time to do one more demo, but I want to next time start to go through the nuts and bolts of this, and we'll start pushing a few things around so you can kind of see better how this works. Some of these blocks I'm going to have to use, the hidden feature, and as a viewer in the live demo, you're not going to be able to see the numbers on them until I reveal them. If you're watching by YouTube video that we're recording, you'll be able to see a little bit more clearly, perhaps, because from my perspective, the block is only semi-hidden, and it's very easy for me to see what factions are associated with. If you like to play block games solitaire, let me close with this. I know that sounds stupid, but there are people that do play block games. They just like to push around in solitaire and just kind of explore different strategies and get an idea of different things that they can do in the game. And then when they go to a conference or a tournament, they kind of train and prepare by pushing things around solitaire. This is a game where that's totally not going to work. This is absolutely unsolitairable. Unless you are unless you have a severe multi-personality disorder, this game is just not going to be able to be played solitaire. So I should lay that out there. If you're one of those types of people who likes to push things around solitaire, this is not the game for you. It's going to work best, I think, with 3 and 4 players. And again, you're going to want to have players that it's going to have to be the right group. And what I mean by that, I've been saying that tonight, but what I really mean by that is players that are not going to take it personal when you stab them in the back, and kick the table over and throw things, because this is a backstabbing game. So you want to play with the right players. If I know Tom Vassell did this really funny video of games not to play with an angry gamer. This is one of them, I think. I could see where people could get kind of upset because it's, if you take things personally, this is not the game for you. Because this game is built around the idea of making deals falsely with people. So just bear that in mind. But if you get with the right group, and if that's the type of game you want to play where there's diplomacy and the potential for backstabbing, this can be a lot of fun for you. If you want a game where everybody gets along and nobody does anything against one another, you definitely don't want this, because I think it would be kind of boring to play in that way. So that's just an intro look at Crown of Roses. Hope that was helpful to at least get you started. Like I said, read through the rule book. It's not clear always on a number of things, so definitely download the Q&A. But at least now with an overview, perhaps if you begin to read the rule book, you'll get a good kind of a bird's eye view in the back of your mind now to help guide you through the rule book.